Good Friday afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Let's Talk Live here on LTL Media. I want to welcome everybody in to the live show. I hope everybody's having a great Friday, and I think this is going to kick off everybody's weekend because I have an amazing guest here that's going to join me just in a second, and I want to make sure I get his bio correct. He's smiling at me over there, but today in studio, I have retired veteran Massachusetts State Police Trooper Todd McGhee. Todd's career spans notable achievements in both law enforcement and security training. After a distinguished 24-year tenure with the Massachusetts State Police, including a significant role at Logan International Airport, Todd retired in 2011. In his second career, he co-founded Protecting the Homeland Innovations, LLC in 2003, where he developed and authorized the Patriots training system and S.A.V.E methodology, which are approved by the Department of Homeland Security. His innovative work has earned him recognition in Time Magazine and ABC Nightline, and he contributes as a Homeland Security expert on Fox 25 News. Todd's extensive experience has led him to train globally and represent the U.S. in fight against terrorism. So I want to welcome in this gentleman here to my left, Mr. Todd McGhee. How are you?
I'm doing good, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, thanks for coming in. It was funny. I checked out your PBS, Rhode Island PBS special. I did a live on it and did a review. And this is about 2 weeks ago, back on either August 2nd or August 3rd. Right. And I had a tremendous response to the video. He said, you're such a great, kind guy, very intelligent. And I said, I got to have this gentleman in my studio. And I reached out to you that same night. You got back to me right away. And I said, hey, I got this studio over in Rentham. I'd love to have you come in and talk about the Karen Reed case. And you said, absolutely. And then come to find out through our talking and our scheduling, we live pretty close to each other.
We're like almost neighbors.
Yeah, we're almost neighbors. So thank you for coming in. It's just crazy. It's crazy, why we're here. We're going to get into a lot of the things Karen Reed today. We're going to talk about maybe some things that could change in policing in Massachusetts. But why don't you start everybody off with your background and tell us a little bit how you got into the Mass State Police?
Sure. Sharing with Brian offline that right after my graduation from Northeastern University in 1987, I know I look young. I just shaved my gray hair for my youthful look. But I had an opportunity to join the Registry Motor Vehicle Police. Literally graduated in June of 87, had a job in July of 87. Started off my career in 1987 with the RMV, and as a result of a state merger in 1992, four state police agencies were merged into one. So Registry Police, Capitol Police, Metropolitan Police, the old state police were all merged into a new Department of State Police. So at the time, the original state police had about 1,000 state troopers, and the addition bumped the complement up to about 2,500. So we're still mandated for about 2,500 troopers for the Commonwealth. I think the numbers are down. It's hard to keep up with attrition, but that's pretty much the size of the agency.
Wow. Let me just ask you this question. Since the beginning of your tenure in the Mass State Police and watching police over a 24-year period, in your mind, how much has it changed?
It has changed, and I'm going to start off being a little critical.
Yeah.
One of the biggest things that has hurt policing is technology. We use technology for everything. The difference is in this profession, you need to know your community. And if you've got a police officer sitting in their cruiser behind their mobile data terminal, you're not out embedded in the community where you need to be. And you're not knowing who the good people are in the community. And you certainly don't know who the bad people are, right? So if your patrol procedures are one that lumps everyone into one category, that's not the policing that our community needs. And that's not the policing that our community trusts. So I think less technology, does it make things faster? Yeah, I get it. Does it make things maybe a little bit more succinct in today's fast-paced life? I get that as well. But you still have to have that human face-to-face interaction.
Yeah. And I think that's where we've kind of lost a lot of things, I think, in society. Agreed. And we were talking about this offline. And, I said, this is why I wanted to build out a studio and have people come in and sit face to face, because we, as humans, and we look at facial expressions, we look at eye contact, body language. I'm sure you know all of this in your training, and it is just a completely different experience. And I completely, have to agree. I think, could we say maybe law enforcement got a little lazy? We use the technology too much and we're not connecting with our communities.
I think that's a fair statement. And I think with that lack of connection, you get a different outcome. And that outcome isn't always favorable. And, for us to get back to a little bit more grassroots, meeting within our communities. I worked on a program in Cook County, Illinois, and it was as a result of strained community and police relations. And the program was designed to train police administrators, frontline patrol, and then community leaders to get them to understand what each side is looking at, look through the lens of each side.
Right.
And then ultimately, we brought them all together so they could have their own civil dialogue. So if we could really leverage ideas like that and be able to connect back public safety with community, no one side can do it by themselves.
Right.
You need that dual support and that dual open mind to be able to reconnect.
Yeah, that's great. I think we just need more of that. We don't see enough of that, of connecting with communities now. I think it's, I don't even really hear about DARE programs anymore. Does that even exist anymore?
Some versions of them are there. I know that historically municipal agencies championed the DARE program, which is great. And the state police for a short while had a DARE program, their version of it. But I think DARE lives best with municipal agencies. They're right there embedded in the community. It's good for them to know the kids coming through the different programs, whether it's at a private school or a public school setting. It's just a better fit for the municipal agencies to be embedded there.
Got it. All right. Let's shift gears a little bit, because I know everybody's excited to hear your take on the Karen Read case. And of course, that's what we'll talk about here for most of the program today. But I do want to go back at some point and talk about, maybe some solutions to fix policing, because we're going to hear a lot about, the police that investigated Karen Read's case and were involved in that. But, I see recently you've been a little bit more vocal about talking about this case. What has maybe prompted you to start speaking up and talking about this and getting involved with Karen's case?
Brian, let me answer the question this way. And I want to go back to the George Floyd murder. That changed me forever. Not that George Floyd in that case was the single case of its nature, but the world saw a police officer take a man's life. And a good portion of my career was training cops how to fight, training cops how to defend themselves, training cops how to apply the handcuffs, pepper spray, baton training. And that's not what we teach. That was murder. Derek Chauvin murdered George Floyd. And I really had to take a self-assessment and say that if you're going to consider yourself a professional in this space, then you have to speak to both sides of justice and injustice. I want to share with you for the first time, I haven't said this on any other podcast. I'm currently working with different attorneys in lawsuits that involve protection of police officers as well as police misconduct.
Wow.
And the cases are here, in all of them in Massachusetts.
Wow.
So I want to be able to be that voice for the men and women in uniform that may not have a voice around that police misconduct that they may be observing, they may be experiencing, but might not have the ability to have that courageous conversation. So I hope for the men and women of law enforcement that do the right thing every single day, that we both share, and family members and friends that wear the uniform. I'm hoping I can be a voice for them. For those that are the bad apples, we're going to talk about it. And we're going to expose the misconduct, the corruption, whatever it is. We're going to talk about it. There's a spirit of transparency that needs to happen. The public needs to have trust with our law enforcement community. If not, we're one step away from anarchy.
I agree. I just want to let everybody know when we get towards the end of the program, Todd was so nice enough. They said he would take some questions from the audience. So stick around and have your questions ready and I'll call on that. It's, it's interesting that you talk about George Floyd, and we just saw recently with Sonia Massey and that terrible tragedy that happened. And, I look at that police officer. I don't really want to call him a police officer because he doesn't deserve that honor. But Sean Grayson, and I don't want to say gentleman because I don't even think he deserves that as well either. But we saw a lot of things that slipped through the cracks in that, his past record, his inconsistencies, his lying on reports. He had charges of, I think, speeding of excessive speed. And it almost seemed like being passed down this line and connecting with different departments, that information was never shared. Is this something that could be developed? Maybe a system if any of officers have any type of infractions or misconduct or, gets fired, could you build some, kind of database and share that with other departments? So these bad, cops that potentially could influence good police officers and turn them bad, is there anything that could be done like that?
Let me tell you what's happening.
Feel, and I'm sorry to cut you off because I feel like that happened. Yeah. That this information was just, it never was talked about.
So in the case of Sean Grayson, what is clear to me from a law enforcement lens, I believe he's employed records of saying reports of showing 5 different agencies prior to the agency that he worked for in the Sonia Massey situation. In that particular case, because he was a problematic employee, he was allowed to, air quote, retire and then move on without that baggage and was hired by another police department over and over and over again. Here's what's happening in Massachusetts to prevent that type of behavior and conduct and cycling of employees. It starts with the Municipal Police Training Council. The Municipal Police Training Council is the state agency that will basically report to police officers and standards and training. They will report the misconduct over to what's called the Brady list, which is different than the Brady bill. That's another dynamic that
I learned about that on Mark Better over the other night.
So this is Brady. A little bit different Brady application. The Brady bill will list not just police officer misconduct, but all government officials, to include elected officials. So what happens is that when a person's name doesn't necessarily mean that they're terminated from their agency, but once their credibility has been compromised, they make this list. For example, Derek Chauvin, who killed George Floyd, is on the Brady list.
Okay.
Just to
so
kind
he
of give
will,
you real,
if he ever by chance he gets out of, he will never ever be acting law enforcement again. Good, and rightfully so.
And let's just say that the end result didn't happen, but he was still found responsible for excessive force. That would have been another mechanism as well for him to make his name on the Brady list.
Got it.
Right. So it's a sweeping notification of misconduct all the way up to those officers that have been terminated, charges, and are incarcerated.
Yeah, that's good. It's good that there's systems like that being, in place,
and that's in place here in Massachusetts.
That's great.
Yes.
All right, let's circle back to Karen Read. So, talking about this and what, like I said, recently you've been a little bit more vocal about it and the investigating and the investigative tactics in Karen Read's case. Can you share for us, when you started actually looking into this and doing kind of maybe your own investigating and looking at it through a different lens? That's why I wanted to have you here today and give us, from a police officer stand. So what do you see when you look at the Karen Read case?
I want to go back to the crime scene, the crime scene itself. And there are some statutory requirements that are in place that maybe the general public are not familiar with. And in this particular case, there's a body in the front lawn of a home. In my honest gut feeling, when Canton Police was called out to the house, they probably really didn't know what they had initially, right from the beginning. And I'm sure very quickly things started to develop. They understood that John O'Keefe was the actual victim that was found, ultimately Boston police officer, and he started stitching things together and putting pieces of the puzzle together. That being said, the state police would not come out to that investigation until there's an actual fatality. And what we learned in the trial is that John O'Keefe was actually still alive, and they tried to resuscitate him. And in fact, the only external injuries besides the head injury were obviously the marks in the forearm, but also chest cracks in the chest. There were fractures in the chest, consistent with resuscitation, not from being struck from a vehicle. But we'll get to that later. So it's important to walk ourselves through back from the beginning. The challenge with the crime scene was that it was lifted in under 3 hours. Well, what does that mean? Well, there's a gap in time from when John O'Keefe actually passed, when the crime scene was lifted, and then when Canton police made additional phone calls for state police to come out. Statutory speaking, the state police will come out only when there is a fatal. So that explains the gap. No one's fault, just the reality of it. But here's the unintended consequences. Once that crime scene is lifted, you no longer have a sterile crime scene.
It's contaminated.
First hole for the prosecution. Regardless of what you think about Karen Reed, Karen Reed does not have to prove in our system of justice. Karen Reed does not have to prove her innocence. So that's the first hole substantiated hours into the potential investigation, the upcoming investigation, followed by inappropriate collection of evidence, blood in solo cups. That's not how blood is to be collected. Stop and shop bags. Now, evidence collection bags are paper, but they're sterile. Nothing's ever been in them before. Secondly, they're tagged. Thirdly, they're sealed. Fourthly, they're transported to the crime lab where they're documented, so you have a full chain of command. So how many holes did I just announce in the last 45 seconds in this conversation? So again, regardless of where you're at on the Karen Reed side of the trial, my first gut reaction hearing those early problems within the investigation, mistrial. That was my first initial gut. As I heard more, I actually thought we were going to get a full innocent verdict coming back because of all the other blunders along the way. But right from the beginning, a mistrial was perfectly aligned.
I look at things too, like no crime scene tape. You've allowed witnesses. I've never seen this before. You're allowing witnesses to walk away and go back inside the residence that people. I've never seen that before. I mean, listen, I've watched the first 48 and Cops, that even in the movies, when police show up on scene, what do they start doing? Gathering all the people around and talking to them. And then if someone walks away, they go, "Hey, what are you doing here? Get over here."
In every investigation, you are a fact finder. Not only am I going to interview the people inside the residence, everyone that has visual ability to that front of that house, to that front lawn, I'm banging on their door. And I'm going to ask them, "Oh, by the way, do you have any Ring doorbell footage?" Right. And if you're going to say no, then I'm going to come back with a warrant. I'm gathering as much facts as I can. We talked offline about confirmation bias. And Todd McGhee's humble opinion, that was alive and well in this particular case. Now, it's okay for you to like someone as a suspect, but you follow the evidence. You follow the evidence, and oftentimes the evidence will lead you away, or it may strengthen that suspicion. But either way, if you're a true fact finder of truth, then your evidence is going to work itself out.
Let's talk about the trooper controversy. We've heard a lot about Trooper Michael Proctor. We've heard about Tully, Buchanan. They become the major topic of this discussion, obviously, because their involvement in the Karen Reed case. How does it make you feel when you hear, corruption like this or possible corruption in a case? How does that make you feel as a retired veteran police officer?
Being it's my former agency, I've had feelings of embarrassment. I've had feelings of disgust. I've had feelings of disappointment from the perspective of the men and women that do the right thing each and every day are going to suffer some level of oversight, or, and again, that might be the wrong words. Forgive me with using that choice of words, but I'm one for, if I screw it up, then I own it. You shouldn't be caught up in my story unless you're a part of my story. The good men and women are going to feel the pain that may come down in some level of oversight. And again, there's strong argument that just should be, but the fact that going to work, doing the right thing each and every day doesn't exclude you from the bad behavior. That's the part that I felt disappointed about, right, for the good men and women on the job. So, listening to Proctor's testimony in others was like fingernails on a chalkboard. It was not credible. There were words not being said that could have been unpacked more, I would think, by Attorney Jackson and Attorney Yannetti. They're great attorneys, but hearing what was shared, I believe that they were very selective in the line of questioning they had of the different witnesses to get to an end game, to get to a certain objective.
Right.
I believe there was more meat on the bone that could have been exposed.
Interesting. Yeah. And, it's just, and we were talking about this offline before we went live, and I've said this a lot on my lives, that, the behavior of Trooper Proctor, this is not just the Karen Reed case.
No.
This doesn't just pop up in someone's mind and I'm going to act this way and talk this way about a specific potential suspect or person of interest, whatever it may be, a witness. This has happened probably thousands of times before. It's not learned behavior. Have you come across anything like this? I mean, of this scale in your career, or heard anything like this? I know there's been a lot of, scandals over the last, couple years. We had the overtime fraud, the embezzlement and kickbacks. We heard about the bear crawl backlash, candidates dropping out, the CDL scam. It goes on and on and on. I mean,
in my career, some of the scandals that would happen, there were troopers that got themselves caught up with driving schools. So at one time, the Class D motorcycle and CDL licensing was a registry function, not a state police function. So there were times when troopers would get themselves caught up with taking an envelope from driving schools and looking the other way and passing individuals that didn't necessarily have all the qualifications and skills to pass a driver's exam. So those were some of the different scandals. I remember there was a court officer that was taking evidence that was supposed to be destroyed after a case was disposed, and taking drugs and using the drugs. That was another scandal that happened within the state police decades ago. But these most recent scandals involving the CDL licensing, I can tell you that these are individuals are friends of mine, and I know them extremely well. Poor judgment on their part. I can see the differences in their involvement. I can see where they may have, and I'm not agreeing with it.
Sure.
But in their mind, well, we're not taking cash. In the state statute, the value is the same. If you take a snowblower as a gift, it's like you took $1,500 in an envelope. Okay, so there's no justification. It is what it is. So that type of conduct and behavior has caught up to these members of the department, and it's a federal investigation. So we'll see where things end up with that. The bear crawls. Listen, I spent a lot of time at the academy. I was a drill instructor. I've done that work. I never had my recruits do anything that I wouldn't do. So if we're doing knuckle push-ups on the pavement, I'm doing knuckle push-ups on the pavement with you.
No, thanks.
Right? From beginning to beginning, right? But that's how I rolled, right? And I knew there was oversight. I respected the oversight. And what happens when there is lack of oversight, whether it's in an academy setting or if it's out in the road, then sometimes there's going to be some compromising of values and integrity. And this is what we're seeing, where people's integrity and their values have been compromised. And I can speak to some of the other scandals where, it just seems like they fit the same narrative where, being compromised at the Turnpike. Um, the interesting thing about the Turnpike was that there were over 40 troopers involved in that. The end result of that, and so people are saying, what's going to happen to the DA's office, with this Karen Reed? Well, I can tell you what happened on the Turnpike. They shut that barracks down. That was unheard of with a decision making.
Mm-hmm.
Good, bad, or indifferent. However many troopers were assigned to that barracks were all reassigned based on the conduct.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So I'm confident that the same thing will happen in the DA's office, that the entire office will be removed, new troopers will be put in. We don't know how soon or how quick, but I'm confident those changes will happen.
How do you think these things happen? I mean, does it usually start with one individual, or is it kind of a group together and, hey, I kind of got away with this? And I mean, it's just, it's
I think there's something, I do some de-escalation training, and I've come across a term called group think. And I think a lot of times when you have group think, you have people that just want to go along to get along. And I think that was very prevalent in the CDL scam, licensing scandal. And I think it was also consistent within the DA's office. And then along with confirmation bias as well in the formal investigations.
right.
Going back to your earlier question, I believe the spillover from Karen Reed is going to hit other cases. We talked about the Michael Walsh case.
Ryan Walsh.
Ryan Walsh,
Yep.
thank you.
Yeah.
A true
Sandra
monster.
Birchmore.
Sandra Birchmore as another potential influence. So we're going to probably see, and we can go back when there was a medical examiner scandal 10, 12 years ago. How many thousands of people were released because the investigation was compromised, right? So when you have a compromise of investigation, there's going to be undesirable outcomes. And these patterns that you spoke of, these behavior patterns that you just spoke of, they're going to impact these other cases. And you're going to see some changes. There's already attorneys that are filing for cell phone information. They're filing for reports. This is already happening in order to bring some level of biasness in the investigation at the hands of Proctor Buchanan and the DA's office.
Yeah, because I was going to ask you, obviously we know everything's adding up with Trooper Proctor. He's been said, let go. And, you have to look at Tully and Buchanan. And do you think that it, is all going to shift more towards Proctor, or do you see more things heading down the pipe for the other two officers involved in this well?
My gut feeling, and let me explain it this way,
Yeah.
Brian, that when I was in the fire marshal's office, we investigated crime scenes as a team. No one single trooper went out and really started collecting evidence, trying to figure out cause and origin, trying to get into witness interviews. There's a lot of steps and layers to an investigation. We also would work with the fire department. So firefighters who were cross-trained as investigators, our role was to go out and figure out cause and origin. When we came across an unattended death, a body inside of, we'll say, a home, in that type of a scenario, we would step aside and the DA's office would come out and they would take lead role in the investigation. So I'm giving you that context of a team concept of investigation. So I believe all the troopers in that office, regardless of rank, are in the same scope as Proctor.
Interesting.
That's my gut feeling.
Interesting. So we probably most likely will hear more things roll down the chain here pretty soon. Yeah. And it's, it's crazy because I sit here and everything that has come out after trial, we've heard about, and I always find this interesting. I want to get your take on this. What we hear in kind of the mainstream media, not, listen, I'm media. I talk about the case. I have guests in that give our, opinions here. I try to say that I'm somewhat piece of the media here. But we hear, in the mainstream media, we've heard more pointing about the fact of the text messages that Proctor had, but not anything about the investigation. And I find that very interesting because to put that in the public, and as you were saying, I wouldn't say secretly, but kind of behind the scenes, you're hearing attorneys asking for, in other cases, like you said, cell phone records. What were some of the investigative tactics? But I always find that interesting. They won't talk about that in the media, because I feel like if you start questioning the investigation, oh man, that's going to spill down in so many other cases. And a case that we just talked about, a few seconds ago was the Brian Walsh case.
Right.
I have my opinion on that.
Mhm.
That's a scary, scary guy.
Yes.
And if that guy is let out in society, and who was the lead on that?
Yes.
Trooper Michael Proctor. So, I guess my question is, why don't, in your opinion, do we not hear about the investigation? Is that because it becomes very questionable?
Two thoughts on that question. And the first one regarding the actual appropriate measures and steps for an investigation, those interviews should have happened within hours, not months, from the Alberts, the McCabe's. Those were key people, the people that were there inside the house, the people that went there after the Waterfall restaurant. All the people that were inside of that house in the immediate aftermath of discovering John O'Keefe's body should have been interviewed. So again, very, very suspicious that those interviews didn't happen sooner. The butt dialing at the wee hours of the morning, there was more to unpack there. The
destroying of the phones, Brian Albert and Brian Higgins, and I'm sorry.
Yep.
I mean,
that's
that
where
is sus.
Yes, that was right where I was going. And in those were the areas that, again, smartly, Yannetti and Jackson nailed it. They were quick to show the improprieties of the investigation based on that behavior, going back to your phrase earlier. Another gut feeling, I don't know this to be the case, but for thought, think about this. We knew that the prosecution had to bring Proctor forward at some point. We're all waited, right? Bated breath. Of course. We're waiting for what's going to happen, what's going to be brought in as evidence. What are these text messages that none of us knew the context of them were? We just knew there was something that was off. So then we hear actually what transpired, right? We hear the misogynistic language. Brutal. We hear the brutal, disgusting language. And then we see that it's shared, not amongst people in the investigation, but old childhood buddies. Right?
No, it was shared with superiors too.
Yes, as well. Yeah. Not just with them.
Yeah. Oh, I understand what you're saying. Yeah.
But also with childhood buddies, right? So we see
a sister.
In a sister, right? So you've got all these inappropriate things going on. But then, well, if this is misconduct, then what's the state police doing about it? Okay, so we understand there's an internal affairs investigation. We come to find out that there's a federal investigation, but it doesn't seem like anything's happening. Todd McGhee's humble opinion. What happened when we finally get the verdict? Within 2 hours?
Yeah, we start hearing the rollout, the fallout,
right? So again, I think politics being a layer of this, why don't you discipline the trooper with misconduct during the trial? How does that help the defense?
Well, yeah, I mean, it does help the defense. Yeah, 100%. So we held on to this information and released it afterwards. And let's say, well, if we go back to a retrial, we probably won't call him back. But guess who is? The defense is going to certainly call him.
Yes.
It's just
right. So in there, I think, again, that was politics at hand. They didn't want to influence good, bad, or indifferent. You make your, for your viewers, please make up your own minds.
Yeah.
Good, bad, or indifferent. That would have significantly impacted the trial sooner had they
100%.
Had they executed that disciplinary action.
100%. That would have crushed the case. It should have crushed their case.
It should have.
And I sit here and go, how did the jury not get this?
And that's where I go by. That's where I go back to, regardless what you think of Karen Reed, the investigation was so flawed. John O'Keefe did not get justice by the people investigating this case, right? Take the attorneys off the table for a moment. The investigation in and of itself was so flawed that it denied John O'Keefe the due justice.
And you're never going to get it because it's so flawed.
It's so flawed.
And I'm very vocal here on this channel. I'm very pro Karen Reed. It does not add up to me. It didn't add up to me right away when I started reading through the documents. I said, something is funny here. And as we got more down the rabbit hole or wormhole, it became very clear to me what happened. And, I go back to Aidan Carney's brilliant investigating and blogging about this and talking about it and understanding the case and having all these amazing people that come to these lives and chats and sharing information. I'm just like, there's just no way. And then I sit here and we go through this 10-week trial. We essentially get lulled to sleep by the Commonwealth. And, their witnesses are literally falling apart on the stand. Can you give me the document? I need to look at it. I'm just reciting from Jennifer McCabe. I need to see the document. Can you show me? And then we're seeing Celebrite information that's literally in black and white, Todd, literally black and white. And we have 227 and then the 6 o'clock with 23, 24, 25. And you literally saying these happened, but this didn't.
Yeah. Pay no attention here. Yeah. So we again, one of the key players in this trial was the snowplow driver.
Yeah, we're going to talk about Lucky. Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. So again, let's kind of play out the scenario in reverse engineer this. That the opportunity, if Karen Reed indeed allegedly in the allegations, if Karen Reed indeed strike, and we'll talk about the science and the data tonight, but if she did indeed strike John O'Keefe with her vehicle, the only opportunity that could have happened was in between the time of 12:20 and 12:30. Well, who comes along at 2:30 in the morning on a few passes in front of the residence, but our friend Lucky, in with the most credibility of anyone that sat on that stand and testified was his testimony. Without a doubt, without a blink, without any indecision, without having to look at notes, he declared no body. No body.
He's got no skin in the game.
None.
He's just there to tell the truth.
Nor did the Dighton officer.
Yeah.
Who testified that tail lens was intact at the time of the tow from the parents' house to Canton PD.
Yeah. And he,
no skin in the game.
And you're going to tell me that his department didn't sit with him and say, go in and tell the truth.
That's it.
We don't want to be part of any of this. We don't want that negative stain on us, because essentially every law enforcement officer or the DA's office or, Michael Morsey, all has this cloud over them. Dighton police doesn't want to be involved in that. It's just going to go in and tell the truth.
That's it. Simple.
They have no skin in the game here.
It's easier to tell
why.
truth.
Yeah, and why get wrapped up in that big scandal? You don't want that on you and ruin your career.
Not at all. That officer was very credible. Lucky was very credible, and what I loved about both of their testimony was just it was a matter of fact conversation like we're having right now. Right? They didn't have to search for answers. They didn't have to try and recall their memory. It was as straightforward as anyone on that stand. So a fantastic testimony, specifically for Lucky, because he was on the stand a lot longer, and I believe really casted some real clarity as to the timeline that Lally had put together. Had a timeline,
right?
But I think that Lucky's testimony really brought some clarity, at least up to that point in the hours of the time.
And that officer's name is Barros, by the way.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
And believe me, I've been doing this a long time. I forget names too. It's a lot sometimes. Let's talk about ARCA and let's talk about the reconstruction. And I want to just kind of compare and contrast Trooper Paul's analogy or his reconstruction of the scene versus the two ARCA gentlemen, Dr. Wolf and Dr. Rensler. I get his name wrong sometimes. But, I just find it interesting for the side that are very opposed to Karen Reed and say, she did it. It's definitely, Trooper Paul, his analysis and his reconstruction of the scene, that's our guy. And then you have these two very qualified scientists that have multiple degrees that are independently hired by the FBI to go and investigate, and just, they have no skin. They're given the information. They're here to reconstruct it and give their analysis. They prove that this accident did not happen. I just don't understand how, looking at this and saying, yeah, well, she hit him. It's those guys, they're not credible. When we hear this from one, and you don't have to comment on this, but Jennifer Coffindaffer, we hear a lot from her against the Free Karen Reed supporters, and always giving her analysis of ARCA, and essentially saying, hey, they're yes, they have degrees, but they didn't prove anything. And I'm like, I just don't get it. It's science. I mean, we live and based in this existence on science. And to me, I'm like, are you denying science? Like,
so I've got a lot of thoughts
Sure.
on this part, and I want to start with I shared earlier I work as a use of force expert, and along with hearing testimony from the plaintiff side, from the defendant side, you also have an independent report called the medical report.
Yes.
And the medical report has its own story to tell. And the story that was told by the medical report was that there was no additional damage to John O'Keefe's body from a 7,300-pound vehicle going allegedly 24 miles.
And I'm sure in your time, over 24-year span, you've seen a lot of car accidents and a lot of pedestrian accidents.
Firsthand knowledge, responding to car accidents. I've seen accidents where bodies were rejected and didn't go 30 feet from an injection. Hit a solid object, didn't have a seatbelt on, right through the front windshield, and didn't go 30 feet. So I'll just put that out there for thought. Okay. The next aspect of the Trooper Paul, the only thing worse than his testimony was his theory. He never tested his theory. This aspect of the vehicle striking his upper arm and spinning him. So, okay, if that's your theory, test it. Let's see it.
Right.
Get an approximate weighted mannequin of 200 plus pounds and just test and see what results you might get. And we didn't hear that. We didn't hear that
We
analysis.
didn't even see it. We didn't even see nothing.
There was nothing.
It was he said, what was it? The crime scene talked to me. And it's just embarrassing. What is the training there? What training is he receiving to just say, oh, well, the crime scene talked? I almost felt bad. Like, I don't know. I just felt like embarrassed for him. Like, you're really getting up here and doing this?
That's not analysis.
And then I look and say, how are you trained? Who trained you? Who was your training officer?
Typically what happens when you are assigned to a specialty unit, you will receive what's considered on-the-job training. So you'll go to probably a number of schools, 40-hour, 80-hour schools. However, as the state's expert, I'm troubled by that. And again, I'm going to use the example of when I was in the fire marshal's office. For the 2 years, I went to in my first year of my 2, I went to over 100 fires. Some of them were dumpster trash can fires behind a 7-Eleven, and others were seven-figure, eight-figure loss working with the ATF. Okay. I would never consider myself an expert, even with 100 fires under my belt, even with a year or 2. We had a trooper inside the unit that actually had a PhD in fire science that had testified in hundreds of cases. He's the expert. He's the true expert, not Todd McGhee, right? So you would need someone along with those credentials to be able to match up with the ARCA scientists.
Yeah.
Their testimony, not only did it prove that the vehicle was not consistent with hitting John O'Keefe, the damage on John O'Keefe's body was not consistent with the vehicle striking him. They were very articulate and offered other possible scenarios. Like they created the cannon and they designed an idea or theory that might be plausible. They weren't saying it happened this way, but they were trying to offer a plausible option.
Right.
Paul didn't do that. Trooper Paul didn't even provide that possible option, and also didn't articulate clear enough for the jury to understand. They don't have the knowledge and level of experience as some of these investigators. So in your testimony, you got to break it down for them. This is just a number of fail points within his testimony.
And I have to add this for the audience because they always love that. They have dubbed the women that watch the show, they have dubbed the ARCA guys the crash daddies. The crash daddies. And I always find it amusing when I go back, and we actually talked about this testimony the other night and went through it. But when Jackson asks Dr. Wolf, so you telling me you built a cannon? And he goes, yeah, it was pretty awesome. Cool. Like they love that stuff because they love doing reconstruction. That's what their job and their passion is. And you know, I just always find that funny. He goes, oh, it's that was pretty cool.
But you know, in any investigation, your job as a reconstructionist is to reverse engineer what could have happened. I didn't see that with Trooper Paul. I didn't see that or hear that in his testimony. And so therefore, the credibility of his testimony
is bad.
It's horrific. And I don't know how that will play out for the next trial. You know,
if we get there,
right? I see problems with obviously Proctor Buchanan and Tully for the next trial. However, even with Trooper Paul, I
you can call that guy back up there again.
Yeah, you can't. You know, so with the prosecution moving forward, as they say, we're still, I think January is a long time away, and I'm not going to be surprised if they pull back and they change their mind.
You think this kind of secretly goes away on like a Friday? They just kind of dismiss it, or
they're going to have to weigh out what they're going to bring forward. And you know, Judge Cannoni's processing right now the first and third counts. We'll see where that ends up. Maybe they're hoping if we get that as a win, then we'll retry it based on that. If they're going to come back, I still don't see how they can find a conviction on count 2, but in the lesser included. However, that could be a determining factor as how they proceed forward, how the prosecution proceeds forward.
I just don't see it. And I have to agree with Mark Betterow. I mean, you said you watched the show the other night, and we just don't see it. I mean, I don't see it. And, you know, and I think that, you know, in my opinion, I have always felt that because, you know, they're so deep in this now that they need Karen Read to be the fall person for this, to keep the cover up going of what spanned across this entire investigation. But not only that, and you were saying before, you know, some unrelated cases that there is some potential fallout that may happen in that. I almost think like they need Karen to go down for this, because if she does, this kind of goes all away. It gets kind of buried a little bit. It's my opinion. That's how I feel.
I don't disagree, Brian. I think that you have a situation where you had defendant's counsel was so well informed about the case and had done their homework. And when you measure the 65 witnesses as compared to their 7, however it broke down, that's how efficient Yannetti and Jackson were. And everyone's saying, how are they going to wrap up in just a couple of days? They're good at what they do.
Because he essentially had every witness that went on that stand crush themselves. And let's not forget Liz Little, too. She did a great job in that courtroom setting and was a real champion for Karen. From what I heard behind the scenes, they grew very close together throughout this trial and was really that person to help hold her together. And I think that's just amazing. And I look at Karen Read's spirit through all of this. I mean, all of the controversy that she's been through, all the financial trouble that she's had to go through to essentially, you know, fight this back. And I look at her spirit, and I think that's what just really makes me connect and want to keep talking about this and having these open and dialogue and these conversations that, you know, they arrest her, they throw lesser charges at her. They probably said, hey, if you take a deal, you'll be out in 5 years. She said, screw this. Okay, we're going to whack you a couple of days later with a higher charge. Well, screw this. I'm going to find some attorneys that are going to come in and help me, and hasn't broke once. I mean, it's just such an incredible spirit. And, you know, and I think that's where people connect with this, you know, being out there on the ground and and talking to people that come out and support the Free Karen Read movement and meeting all these different individuals, that's the one thing they say is that she never breaks. And I think that's the attraction that brings you in. It's a powerful woman, powerful spirit.
I want to go back and just bring up the statements of I hit him.
Sure.
We were all fixated on the trial, the 9 weeks of the trial. But as a reminder, this is a January 2022 case. The investigation is a lot longer than 9 weeks.
Yeah.
In those early witness depositions, that phrase of I hit him was in question format.
Of course it was.
That's what all of the people that recanted to a declaratory statement did on stand. But originally, and this is what Jackson was picking up on. And again, I don't want to pick fights. I don't want to rehash and relitigate, but you have to go back to what was in play. And what was in play in the original depositions was that it was in a question format. She didn't know. She's panicking.
You're saying I hit him?
She's trying to figure it all out.
It's My Cousin Vinny.
Yeah.
You've heard the reference probably around this.
That's right.
I shot the clerk.
Exactly.
I shot the clerk.
She's trying to figure it all out in the moment. She's in shock, probably in shock. And so,
were you saying I hit him?
Exactly.
You blaming this on me? I hit him? Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
So now to change the context is damning because it's in front of the jury. And Jackson was smart to be able to call that out and hopefully try and get the ship off the rocks in steering in the right direction.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we talked with Mark the other night. I had Mark Mazza Media on for a little while, and Mark stayed on for about 2 hours afterwards. And we were talking about the trial and all the evidence that had come in. I mean, there's so much evidence that came in, so many witnesses. And, you have to look at it from an outside perspective. Myself and how I formed my opinion was we had a 10-month lead on the trial, so we could hash this over and look at it and look at Aiden Carney, Turtle Boy's reporting and all the other articles that have come out and formulate our opinions. And you have the jury that comes in and sits in for 10 weeks and everything's just getting flooded at them. But I still would have thought, like, really, she should walk out acquitted. What is the hang up here?
Yeah.
What is the hang up? It just didn't make sense. But, after the mistrial, it obviously, bred new life, and we should not be going through this again. But I always say this, the worst thing that you can do for Alan Jackson and David Yannetti is give them time. And we saw a lot of that where, a lot of the witness testimony would end like on a Friday halfway through. Well, they got all weekend to go back now and look at this again and sharpen their pencil and go, oh, really? Is that what you said on Friday? Well, let's go back and look in that. And I think, building up, if we, God forbid, we go to a second trial here, giving them more time, I think is just going to really push this thing through.
Yeah, I think they're going to be prepared for a couple of different scenarios. Yeah. There's only so many more plays the prosecution has in their playbook. And they're smart enough to figure those out ahead of time. So whatever transpires, confident they'll be ahead of the game.
Yeah, I agree. Let me do this. I just want to get to a couple of the super chats that people have sent out. We'll read those because I don't want to be rude. And what we'll do here in a little bit is we'll take some Q&A from the audience if they want to pop out some questions. And if you want a question to be out there right now, send a super chat. I'll pull it up. We can start doing some of that. And I want to talk about kind of maybe in the second portion of the show, talking about police reform and some things that we can do better in our communities and policing. And I have a lot of questions about transparency and stuff like that. But let me just do this really quick. So Heather, thank you for becoming a new member. I appreciate that. Lit for LTL, thank you, says has become a new member as well. Buzzing for the Truth using their 7-month highlight and said, how do you not go in the house? Talking about what we just went over. This was an earlier question, and Todd essentially went into that. Fancy with a $7 super chat says, question, Canada or United States? How do we support whistleblowers and transparency in policing without making the wrong info public, like info related to cases? So I don't know if you want to tackle that one.
Sure. I think it's going to depend on the misconduct, right? If you have a scenario where there's charges brought, or the conduct is just on a street level and it's a bad interaction between a resident and the police officer, that's a different circumstance. You mentioned earlier behavior. Behavior has patterns. So as far as and I always tell this when I'm in front of a civilian audience, if you feel that you've been injustice, don't settle your grievance right there. The officer is going to perceive that as a threat, and it's going to go very badly. Make a complaint. And then people say, well, Todd, nothing's going to happen if I make the complaint. If there are enough complaints, the police department will be compelled to do the proper investigation. I'll give you an example. There was misconduct in the state of New Jersey. New Jersey State Police, and again, it wasn't department-wide. It was a very aggressive troopers that were doing drug interdiction on the interstate. They took a course that was taught by the DEA, and I believe the course is called Operation Pipeline. It was a drug interdiction training course. And inside of the course, there was a profile, rental cars that were traveling at high rates of speed, I believe 1 or 2 occupants. So it was kind of a profile that they had filtered. Well, a handful of very aggressive New Jersey troopers threw out all of the criteria and started pulling over motorists of color, period, the end. And did they get some drugs and guns off the street? Yes. But did they have a lot more egregious stops where innocent people got pulled over?
For sure.
So that ended up in large lawsuits, and there was a consent decree that happened, and they had federal oversight for a number of years. So that happened during my time, my tenure within law enforcement. And not only did that conduct affect the New Jersey State Police, it was statewide countrywide ripple effect that happened. So these things eventually do catch up.
Yeah.
So when you do have whistleblowers, or when you do have those different complaints based on misconduct or corruption, it does eventually get addressed. And I'm sorry, it doesn't happen probably as soon as it needs to be. But to say I'm not going to follow through because nothing will happen, that's not the right approach.
Love that. Thank you. Let's see. Chloe, $10 super chat, says tunnel vision is contagious. They zeroed in on her, meaning Karen Reed, and the wording of the jury notes showed that they did the same too. They could get past personal opinions of her conduct. That's not the standard. I appreciate that comment. And then let's see. Buchanan or Bukaki's missing dentures said, please ask him about Turtle Boy's cases. Do you have any opinion on Turtle Boy's cases? What has happened here? Essentially his speaking out, to these were potential witnesses in the Karen Reed trial. We have a free speech in our laws, or our I'm losing the word here, but essentially, they're trying to shut him down and say that there's witness intimidation. I think it's bogus. I think you have a free speech right to talk about whatever you want. I just recently saw there's a new documentary about Lacey Peterson, and I saw a clip of literally reporters with bullhorns yelling at Scott Peterson. Now, wouldn't that be witness intimidation, or is it free speech? But I don't know if you have any opinion on this.
I don't know, Aiden, Turtle Boy, and I would venture to say that under First Amendment free speech, there's probably a good chance once he gets through his situation, he may have a lawsuit ready to fire off. So again, violation of protected speech is something that the courts will address, and I would encourage him to pursue that if that's what's in his wherewithal to do.
And he's got Mark Betterow as an attorney, which is great, and Tim Bradle, which is another phenomenal attorney. So that's Todd's opinion on it, and I've gone with it too. Fight it all the way back. I'm sure he's going to have a civil suit. And the thing is that and we know this here because the chat is very in tune with it. But the witnesses in the Karen Reed case don't want to go to a civil trial, because what happens in a civil trial? You get more discovery, and they're not going to want that. I would assume.
Yes, you get a lot more discovery, right?
And going back to Chloe Albert's Revenge, I love these chat names. $10 says the hang up. That was weird. The chain of events clause that gave them permission to blame her for simply dropping him off that night, in my opinion. I don't know if you want to comment on that at all.
Yeah, I go back to, you just don't hang out on a person's front lawn for an extended period of time in a snowstorm. So to the other person in the chat regarding not going into the house, Canton PD was asked that very early on by Yannetti and Jackson, and their response is, well, we didn't have a warrant. Sorry, that doesn't apply right now. You go and you get an interview from the occupants ASAP.
Yeah,
ASAP. Now,
you have an injured or possible dead police officer on your front lawn.
Absolutely.
Why are we not,
and it's someone you know. It's someone you have a relationship with. This isn't a random
officer down.
That's right.
We need assistance immediately.
That's right.
That was never said in any of these calls. There was no one running up to the door of Brian Albert's house saying, what the hell is going on here? Did you hear or see anything? It's pretty sickening.
Yeah, it's horrible.
It is. It's pretty sickening. Let's see. Buzzing for the Truth, $2 says, wait and see what happens to Tully in Turtle Boy's trial. Yes, and we talked about that a little bit earlier, and Todd, in his opinion, feels like there's going to be a lot more fallout with those troopers as well. Let's talk about, we hear a lot about corruption in policing in Massachusetts, and I kind of want to spread this maybe national as well, too. We're seeing a lot more things, and I think through the power of the internet, having a phone in people's hands, video, things that we never maybe used to see, we're seeing a lot more of now, postings on the internet and stuff. It just seems like me that we're seeing a lot more of this corruption across America in our policing. What do we do here, Todd? What are the things that we can do to fix this? Is it a training issue? Is it a background check issue with potential candidates to join policing? Why not change the system? What can we do better?
Brian, I think it's all the above. I don't think we can land on just one or two things. I think there's a situation where every police department's probably operating at a deficit to their roll call. So when you take the case of Sean Grayson, in that particular case in Illinois, you've got a substandard hire that is a candidate for your police department, and if your objective is just we got to fill the roster, you get criminals like that to join your force. And so there's got to be a better vetting process. There's got to be training. And after George Floyd, I disagreed with the defund the police movement.
Yeah,
because the last thing you want is an untrained police officer. Therefore, you get a bunch of Sean Graysons running around, thugs with badges. So you have to have the level of training, but more importantly, you have to have the level of accountability. So the supervisors need to be better trained as oversight for their patrol officers. You got to have internal oversight in order to, and there are departments around the country that have civilian review, right? And police officers hate to hear that, right? Because they feel that committee doesn't understand what police officers go through. Again, I like to say good, bad, or indifferent. If you don't police yourself, then something worse is going to come along. So get it together, right?
Yeah, and then when these things happen, we need transparency. We can't bury them because
bury it.
Even in, we'll just take Sonia Massey's story. That didn't hit the airways till like almost 2 weeks after it happened, because that was earlier in July. And then it was like almost 2 weeks. Why is this not instantly being called out?
So in the Sonia Massey case, they tried to cover up. And the response when the call went in to dispatch responded with self-inflicted. And he replied.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, that was in the making.
That was caught on camera. I think they were
the second backup officer,
right,
had rightfully so his body cam on from the beginning of the encounter with her. Grayson's was off the entire time.
Of course.
Fortunately, that second officer had. But again, going back to what else can be done, the duty to intervene is now part of policing. That's in writing. I did it as part of not wanting to get caught up in an aggressive trooper's behavior. I would intervene. I'll give an example. I was working in Roxbury. One particular evening was towards the end of the shift. We saw a domestic on the side of the road. We went over. It was a male and a female, and I approached the female because again, you're supposed to separate the parties. My partner approached the male, and as I'm speaking with her, I'm hearing a choking sound. I turn around, and my partner's choking the man of the couple, and I'm hitting his arm. Switch, switch, and we switched, and we were able to resolve things and got things to a peaceful resolution. But I learned my lesson in that. And that was very early. I think I was on the job maybe 2 years.
Wow.
My first early parts of my career. And I said to myself, I'm never going to get myself in that situation again. And when I saw troopers attempt to be heavy-handed, I absolutely stepped in. That's now something in writing as a result of police reform. That duty to intervene is part of policy and procedure, at least in the state police.
Yeah, I mean, I'm almost like going back to filling positions. I almost feel like it is under a lot of pressure to fill those positions because people don't want to become police officers anymore. Do you think that has a lot to do with because society has changed? It's a lot more criminal activity. People have access to illegal weapons and guns, and let's just face it, there's crazy people out there now.
And society's more dangerous. And I think it goes back to our earlier conversation around the lack of human interaction. And to think that a tool like social media actually serves to isolate the user. We're losing that face-to-face empathetic muscle that once was there. And in law enforcement, I used to say to my recruits that people are going to need your help a lot more than they're going to need your handcuffs. You come across people in their worst moments just by nature of the job. Just by nature of the job. And you've got to be prepared to bring that level of grace and empathy if you want to be effective and have a full career at it.
It was funny. I was watching, and it's funny that you say that because just before our live today, I was on YouTube and the algorithm spit out an old episode of Cops. It was Providence. And I was watching, it was a woman police officer, and she said that almost that same very, very exact thing. That, you're coming into people in their worst situation. And again, it's just the nature of the job. You have to be a psychologist. You have to be a friend. You have to be someone that serves their community, a parent, a brother, a sister. You have all these different roles that you play with different either victims or just or just people in passing by.
That's right.
And I want to get into talking about communities now. How do we, in your opinion, how do we fix that in the community? We've seen, I think it's especially over the last 5 or 10 years, a lot of this, and probably because of the power of the internet, having a phone in your hand is all pushed to the forefront. Now, how do we build that trust back in the community with, policing and people that live in their communities?
There are a number of police officers who get it right every day. And I was watching a video the other day, and it was a police officer in full duty playing one-on-one. And it was a white police officer in a black community, and no one of the bystanders watching looked like him, right? It was absolutely 100% a black community. He got it right? He's interacting. He can tell you who the good people are.
Yeah.
He can tell you the people we need to watch out for. Right. So that's the first part of it. And I challenge my brothers and sisters in uniform to take the first step, but it's not the only step. You still need your community leaders. You still need people to come forward and say, I'm afraid. I don't know if I want to call you for help. I'm afraid because I've seen what's happened to my family members, but I don't want to live in fear anymore. How can we do better? But how can we do better together?
Yeah. And I think going back out there and going all the way back to the beginning conversation, living in this digital age, you got to get out and it's in boots on the ground and serve your community and talk to people. That's how you build trust with people and you build trust in those communities. And I think we've lost our way. And I think, COVID probably had a big angle on that as well, too, because we did so many things digitally for such a long time. And this distancing and social distancing and not being able to go out and be active in your community. And, I think we just got into kind of lazy policing and just being, not doing this, having formal face-to-face conversations.
Without a doubt.
We've lost that, and we need to get back to that, because I feel like that's why we're here on Earth, to do these kinds of things.
I'm waiting to hear the 10 years, the 10, 15-year study after COVID, post-COVID, of the hidden injuries that has been a result of COVID, the social distancing and all the isolation and all those different things.
I mean, it's definitely going to affect those kids that came up.
That's right. That whole generation.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what I wanted to talk to you about? Back in February of March of 2024, I don't know if you followed a lot of the things that were going on in Brockton High School. And, it got to a point where they were actually calling for the National Guard. And I always find this funny, because, these situations sometimes get so out of hand. And then you have community leaders that come in and say, hey, we are of the people. We can help here. I am the face of the people that are going through the situation. Why do you always feel, why do I always see that the people of power, the people in these communities are in charge of, boards and select boards. They don't want the outside help. And then they just give these quotes, and I always go to like Governor Healy, when all these situations or scandals that come out in policing, or Mass State Police, or just even any scandal that happens, they come out, they give the quote, they give the sound bite, but I never really feel like anything happens. And then a couple of weeks later, another scandal happens, or more violence breaks out. Why not accept the help?
I experienced that as a consultant firsthand. It's extremely hard to bring your services into the different school districts. I know that what's in our charter here as Attleboro residents is that you have city council is one entity, the mayor's office is a second entity, and then you have the school committee as a third leg of the stool. So each are independent of each other. They typically don't cross over. Whatever internal politics are usually in a silo. And I would want to say, again, my opinion, I'll throw it out there. Some may not agree with me, but it's almost, we just want to keep our problems in-house. And with that, you get unresolved problems. And out of that stems new problems. So until you're ready to fall on your sword and say, we don't have the answers, we need the help, you're going to give up and make statements like, we need the National Guard to come in. That's not the answer.
Yeah. And then you look at, who are the ones that suffer? The teachers and the students.
That's right.
Those kids.
That's right.
It's the kids that suffer.
That's right.
And then the kids are scared. I don't want to go to school because there's violence and people getting punched and robbed and kicked and, whatever it may be.
And how many statistics in research show that kids are carrying weapons for protection, not because they want to be a bully, not because they're part of a gang. And I know that's alive and well in Massachusetts, the gang activity. But a lot of these kids are just trying to make it to school and back home.
It's crazy. I just wish that, let's drop our ego here and do what's best for the teachers and the students.
We can do better.
We can do better. I like that. I like that. Okay, let me just pull this up here. Let's see. Mike B from 413. I like that. I like that, how that rhymes. $5 says, as far as this Canton PD and CFD personal who testified about I hit him with zero mentions in their reports is, quote, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. Now taught. Yes, we agree on that. And then Lawgal, $20 says, Todd, thank you for a very candid discussion about a subject through the lens of trying to improve processes moving forward. You are very knowledgeable. You have a very knowledgeable approach to this. That's what one law girl says. We have $5 here from Nay. Said, Todd, you are a role model for law enforcement. TP made, TP made a lot of clerical and spelling errors in his reports. How does that throw off an investigation?
Yeah, so the accuracy in your report can change context.
Yeah,
we've got a police officer that was killed. We have a defendant that's being charged with murder in her life can change based on testimony, based on the reports, based on the findings. So some people may say, well, just a little oversight. You can't have that. You've got to be 100% locked in, because words matter.
Mm-hmm.
And when words are not taken seriously enough to make sure that you're vetting your reports, it does have the ability to influence and change the context of things. As we spoke about earlier, I hit them.
Yeah.
Question format or declaratory, right? Huge difference in the impact of just that nuance.
I agree. And by the way, Kelly Reed, who is Karen Reed's cousin, is in our chat right now, and she said, "Great show, Brian and Todd."
Awesome.
So that's really good stuff. Let's do this. Want to take some questions from the audience? Sure. All right. If anybody has a question, if you really want it to be pushed towards the forefront, you can do it in a form of a super chat. If not, you can do it this way as well. I just want to cue and then ask your question. I'll pull it up. I'll read it to Todd. I'll let him answer, and we'll go from there. A lot of people are saying in the chat, thank you for having him on. Let's see. The chat's going really quick. Brian, thank you for having Todd on. Such a voice of reason. I completely agree. And I hope at some point we can do this again. I'd love to have you come in.
Yeah, I want to do it with Mark.
Yeah, we'll get Mark in here when he comes down. But if anybody has a question, like I said, throw your cue and your question. I'll pull it up for Todd. And if you haven't done this already, we need to get this stream to 1,000 likes to get it out into the algorithm. Smash that like button, please, please, please. We'll wait here and see if we have some questions rolling. This is your opportunity. We have a veteran, honest, good police officer here that was on the force for 24 years. Ask your questions. He doesn't mind. We'll bring it up.
Brian, I appreciate the very kind words, especially originally shared by you, and then again on your show with Mark P.A.T.R.I.O. I just want to call balls and strikes.
Yeah.
And as I see things as they relate to the trial, and as I shared with you earlier, bringing that unique insight, not just as a former member of the department, but working with attorneys and understanding the nuances of trial and the evidence that gets brought into trial. As I mentioned earlier, the medical report, right? Those types of things have weight.
Yep.
And they're easily overlooked. As we talk about the case, they're easily overlooked. And I think it's important that we're not, I'll speak for myself.
Sure.
What may sound like support for Karen Reed comes from analysis. It comes from understanding the criminal justice system. It comes with understanding the flawed investigation. It comes with understanding how attorneys are going to poke holes in the prosecution's case. All of that has to come from myself that has that experience and that background. So that's again that unique perspective that I try to bring to the audience.
Yeah, and that was something that I said to you right before we went live. I said, I just want you to be you. We just want to hear your opinion. That's why I brought you here, and I respect that. I'm going to have my opinion. You're going to have your opinion. Sure. The next person, we had 10 other people in here, are going to have this different opinion. And, but we do appreciate that. All right. We have some questions coming in. I'll kind of selectively pick through some of these. So Tracy's asking, is the Brady list available for the public to see?
Yeah. Just do a Google search, Brady list, and it'll come up. And there'll be a few faces in names. And also, I believe there will be a small little synopsis as to why they are on the Brady list.
Thank you for that. So I had one of my friends ask, does Todd think that Chief Helena Rafferty should ask for an independent agency to review the current SOPs, standing operating procedures, and recommendations?
There's a number of consultants that do that work. Absolutely. Bring in a third party, have an independent, unbiased look, and make sure that you're up with contemporary police standards and practices. And
then my same friend asked another question. How does Todd believe the federal investigation, this is the Karen Reed case, will play into the retrial, their findings?
Yeah, I think that everything from the first trial, assuming that January of 2025 happens, everything will be on the table. And as you mentioned earlier, Brian, with Yannetti and Jackson having more time, they're probably really going to roll up their sleeves around that federal investigation and introduce whatever more they can, not just the ARCA experts.
So you're very popular, and America Nana is asking any chance that Todd would do the police audit for Canton. Also, I have so much very much respect for Mr. McGhee, who you are, and all of law enforcement should study under.
I appreciate that. No, I don't want the contract to go or do the oversight for the policies and procedures.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Question, Todd. You seem happy and content in your new role, but do you miss policing on the front lines? That's a great question.
It is a great question. And my canned response all the time is, I miss the clowns, not the circus.
I love it. Lisa, $5 super chat asks, Mr. McGhee, is it normal for Mass State Police to be embedded in any of the DA offices? If so, why?
So the setup in Massachusetts is to have investigators assigned to the DA's office, and they will go out on their investigations. And if there is criminal allegations of criminal conduct, then they will serve as the case manager, in this case, Trooper Proctor, in the office. So they are the field workers. They go out, they capture the information. They are supposed to be the fact finders, is their primary role. And then from there, that evidence is then presented to the DA. Then the DA will make a decision if they want to bring charges.
All right. Let's go here. Linda asking, question, Todd, if Karen Read goes forward to trial with the Commonwealth, will the Commonwealth call Proctor, Tully, and Trooper Paul? That's just so hard to visualize.
Hard to visualize, but I can tell you that if they don't, most likely defense will.
Yes. Well, yeah, we talked about that earlier. Okay. MJA Boston has a question, says, thank you guys. Will any of the McAlberts be held accountable for what they've done, in your opinion?
So there's one of the no, it's Albert that's currently that's on suspension with pay. Hard to tell. I think that all the players are, if we see another trial, I see more maybe direct examination as opposed to where Jackson just did a fantastic job on cross. I think we may see more piercing right into some of the players that were closer to the night. Less about the children, more about maybe some of the adults.
Law Girl, $5 says, what is your opinion on the interviews of fact witnesses in the presence of homes of others? There has to be some type of SOP on that.
Absolutely inappropriate conduct. Interviews that I've always done, getting a witness statement, has always been one-on-one, in no onlookers or anyone in earshot. So again, lazy at best, but to be a little bit more appropriate, to be more specific, inappropriate behavior by an investigator.
Okay. So Sarah is asking, I'm wondering if Todd thinks that the reason for no other law enforcement either showing or speaking about it is they believe that she's guilty, or if they really actually are afraid. So I guess maybe other law enforcement not speaking up.
So some of the conversations I've had with some of my friends, still within the Mass State Police, not everyone is of the opinion that she's guilty. There are people that rightfully so followed the evidence, followed the trial, and landed where we did, as far as I was thinking acquittal was going to come, but the fact that mistrial was not a surprise.
Let's just do this. Mags in Florida, $15 says, much respect for Trooper McGhee. My father, a 30-year FBI, 20 in the NYC. He also said, never crossed the line. Did Proctor have a warrant for Karen Read's card prior to the towing? Consistent rights in critical in LE.
I don't believe he had a warrant. I believe that, and again, I have to go back and refresh myself on some of these nuances, but that was all a part of the question of why did the vehicle go to Canton PD.
I was just going to ask you, Todd,
yeah,
why not tow this back to the Mass State Police crime lab? It was right there.
Yeah, that's right. That again would have been the right protocol. That should have been a natural order to be able to seize the vehicle. You're going to examine it. That's not the question here. Why did you take it to a Canton Police Department who had since recused themselves from the case.
And wait 3 days to process it.
That's right.
3 days to process.
Back to the timeline.
I don't know, Todd. Little weird.
Yeah.
Little weird. Let's see. Donnie, $5 said, would Todd consider running for president of the United States? and I will be your VP. Thank you. That was very nice. I appreciate it.
I ran for mayor of Attleboro at one time in my life, and I had a great experience, but that was good enough.
Okay. Lucy, $5 said, why would some jurors be stuck on any of the charges unless they believe the prosecution?
Yeah, great question. You know, for the life of me, if they landed unanimously on counts 1 and 3, I don't understand how they didn't fall unanimous on count 2 as well. I know that they got her blood alcohol. She was sectioned, you know, right in the immediate aftermath, and there would have been some information and data about her health that was captured there. So they would have got her blood alcohol there. But if it's proven she didn't hit by science, she didn't hit John O'Keefe, I don't understand how you can land on count 2 being split on count 2.
So interesting.
Just not following it.
I said, and I asked Mark Betterow this the other night, you know, if we go back to a retrial and you know, the defense, in my opinion, should lead right away with ARCA. And let's do this time around. Let's have a visual representation of their reconstruction, because I think, you know, in the way of our life and the way that our you know, life is now and the way our brains have evolved, we're all very, very visual creatures.
Yes, sir.
That's kind of how we learn now. And I think that if they would have had that right off at the bat, because I waited for it, I went, all right, we're going to call some physics experts up. This is going to be in the bag. And it was just all vocalization, which was still great. It was very informative. But I think if they got up there with a video and said, here it is, here's the reconstruction, it probably would have helped.
I'll double down on that and say, would they test the prosecution's theory with Trooper Paul?
That'd be great.
So let's have a comparison, a side-by-side comparison.
Compare and contrast. Yep. Yeah, I love that. I love that. Yeah, Boxer Brief is asking, would Todd recommend young men to still go in law enforcement? Certain departments may be stricter, have more integrity, no good and bad in every job. But I was looking into the military in law enforcement after, did see some changes in the recent years. What's your recommendation?
So again, I had a fantastic career. Was it perfect? No. But it provided for my family, and it's opened up opportunity for life after, right? So what I do now is directly contributed to my credibility from the state police. So as a young person looking for a career path, you have to understand that you are eventually going to see the darker side of life, and you're going to see a darker side of humanity. And it really is so individual that if you don't have the stomach for that, not a good career choice for anyone to come across.
It's getting wild. It's getting really wild.
Streets are getting dangerous.
And we're seeing a lot more, you know, just recently, there was a case in Rhode Island and a officer down in Brewster, Massachusetts. We're seeing this stuff with child pornography again. And it's disgusting. And it's law enforcement officers that are involved in this. And it's like,
yes,
where, you know, do we have to is there have to be more psychological testing? Do we retest officers, do periodic checks through their career? I mean, how do we fix this stuff and get these bad eggs out?
You know, a lot of the testing is front loaded as a candidate. And once you're on, you go through the academy, and down South, there's really not a lot of academies. You go through,
you just kind of go,
you just kind of get the badge and the uniform and the issue your gun too. Really scary. So that oversight is critical in being able to just better manage behavior and some of the off-duty antics that police officers are doing. So it's difficult. It's a hard conversation, but it's a necessary one that we have to be able to get out in front of.
Fancy RPG has a question, said, would it be better for more diversity in our police force, like more women or other ethnicities? And I'm sorry, I got that. I just got choked up on that word. But what's your feeling on that?
So, you know, You know, I go back. I was a product of affirmative action, and I was fortunate. I benefited. I was able to get a job through the civil service in landing on a state agency. That being said, I don't like quotas. I don't like scenarios where you have to fit numbers
Excuse
because
me.
you're gonna find a lesser quality candidate. I am, however, open to police departments working. We something that we did in the state police. It was a small outside association that we established. We were going into the high schools in order to get young men and women of color interested in law
Mm.
enforcement because their only interaction was negative. We were trying to get them to understand a career path. State Police Academy also had it was sponsored by.
Changing hearts and minds.
That's you have
Yeah.
to impact it, but you
Yeah.
have to impact it early.
Yeah.
And this is what we found the same potential candidate of color that could go through and pass a background check and have the aptitude to get through the testing, the battery of testing, they were pursuing law. They were
Mm.
pursuing engineers.
Mm.
Engineering. They were looking for different cycles of other vocations in law enforcement. They just
Yeah.
it was a disconnect. So if that happens, I'm an advocate of having programs that reach down and reach early.
Love it. Love it. Let's see. Mags in Florida again, $10 says Lauren, LEO must be educated on constitutional rights. So many don't know them.
Yeah, he nailed it. There's a number of, I'll give you the example. No one wants to be on the receiving end of a cell phone, but that's protected speech under the First Amendment.
Mm.
And you see a lot of cops interrupting that exercise of their right.
Your opinion on police officers having to be required to live in their communities they work in?
I'm mixed on that. I know that some of the urban departments will incentivize police officers to live within their community, but I can tell you, it's difficult to police a community that you live in. So I don't see that as a hard factor or essentially diminish policing if someone lives outside of their community.
Let's do this. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing now, any projects you have going forward, and where people can find you if you're on social media?
I don't do much on social media other than LinkedIn. However, some of the projects I work with, some of my clients are Six Flags. I do a lot of work with their corporate security. Mass General Hospital here locally is one of our clients. I do some work with other healthcare facilities here in Massachusetts. But also, I like working with nonprofits, whether it be a school or a small organization, to help them enhance their security posture. So things like risk assessments, taking a look at their CCTV, their access control, all those types of things.
Do you have a website?
PHItraining.com.
Perfect. And we'll end with this one. This is great. Todd, any career highlights you can share?
Oh, lots. But I can tell you that my work with Department of State, providing counterterrorism training to partner nations, has brought me to 12 different countries around the world.
Wow.
Places like Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Africa 7 different times. I was in a place called Tajikistan, which is the country right next to Afghanistan.
Yes. Yep.
And I was 2022. I was in Erbil, Iraq. So I've been to some fantastic places, met some wonderful people, and have been treated like gold where I've gone.
That's great. That's great. Todd, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you here in LTL Studio today. This conversation has been fantastic. I appreciate your open and honestness and sticking to who you are. And that's what I said when we came in and sit down. Just be you. I don't want you to mold it for the interview or make you feel like I got to be pro Karen Reed. I wanted you to be just yourself and give your take on this whole situation and scenario that we've heard about in the Karen Reed case, and give us some education about policing. Your background, things that we could do better, things that we can do better in our community. And hopefully some of those changes can happen and really, uplift the community and not be afraid of policing in the future, and get good, honest candidates in there that want to do this job, do it correctly, and serve the community. So it has been a pleasure. You are welcome back into the studio anytime. We're literally neighbors. Just get in touch with me. We'll have some conversations.
I got to tell you, Brian, thank you so much for the kind words that you shared from the PBS uh, um, interview that I did, as well as your show with Mark Betterow. Just a shout out to Mark. Mark, looking forward to the next time we can put our heads together and share some of our insights. Thank you for your platform. Your platform is so necessary in order to bring clarity to some of these different issues. It's not about choosing sides. It's about speaking the truth. And so I appreciate what you're doing, and God bless you. Continue to do so.
Thank you. That is Todd McGhee there. If you want to look up into the camera and wave bye to everybody as we hit the outro, we're going to get him back in here at some time. And I appreciate everybody tuning in to this episode of Let's Talk Live. All right, everybody. We'll see you soon. Take care.